This has been constantly requested in the comments of my videos, so I've decided to make a compilation of the stories that I've told on my channel that have actually creeped me out. If you have any video ideas, just leave them in the comment section. A few years ago when I was in college, I would take odd jobs to pay my half of the rent. One day in particular, I was babysitting a set of twin boys that were 3 years old. The mother told me she hired me because she would only hire men due to her crazy ex-husband. I was confused when she told me that, so I asked why. She showed me a picture of him and said not to answer the door for him, don't let him in, and to not let him see the kids. I just said okay. I thought she was being dramatic, but I went along with it. After she left, the kids seemed harmless, so I told my girlfriend to come over. After that, there was a knock at the door. I figured it was her, so I opened the door. It was the ex-husband. This guy looked a lot scarier in real life than he did in the pictures. He towered over me with tattoos everywhere, including his neck, a bald head, and gold teeth. He asked to see his kids. I didn't know what to do, so I just told him, hold on, and I closed the door. I really didn't know what to do, so I called the woman and she didn't answer, so I texted her. Still nothing. Eventually he started knocking on the door some more, but I would talk through the door, letting him know that I can't let him in, nor could I let the children out to see him due to the mother's request. He didn't like that too much. I stopped talking, then the knocking stopped, and the man said, okay. But it was an okay that sounded like he was going to get me back for not letting him in. I look outside and I see that he pulled off. I didn't call the police because he left. So my girlfriend texted me and it said she'll be there in 2 minutes. Then a few minutes go by and she isn't there yet. Then I see one of the twins looking out the window and he says, there's daddy. I look out the window and I saw the most disturbing thing you could think of. The man was on top of my girlfriend, stabbing her repeatedly in the side of her head with a screwdriver. Her body was shaking, but she wasn't making any noise. And there was blood everywhere, all over her head, face, ground, and that man. I wanted to burst out of that door to help her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I called the police. The man just stood there, staring at the house. He never tried to escape, just waited for the police as if he were crazy. The twins' mother and the cop showed up at the same time, and she was hysterical, going between Spanish and English while crying. I felt numb, guilty, and ashamed that I called my girlfriend over, and she was killed. And I was a coward that stayed in the house. Till this day, I still feel the guilt. In December of 2006, I was 15 years old at the time. I had an extreme fear of the dark. While laying in bed, I would always cover my mirror, or I'd face the opposite side of the room that my mirror was on. I'd also make sure that I didn't stare at any dark corners of my room, along with my closet, which was very dark space that I couldn't help but face because it was on the opposite side of the room from my mirror. The next thing was that if I look in the mirror from my bed, I could see my closet. So one night, for some reason, I decided that I wanted to get over my fear of the dark. When I went to bed, I didn't cover up my mirror, didn't put my head under the covers, nor did I face the opposite side of the room from my mirror. I laid down, turned my lamp off, and stared at my mirror. Then I guess I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was looking at my door. Then I panned my eyes over to my mirror. And to my surprise, there was someone standing in the darkness of my closet that I saw in the mirror. I fumbled to turn on my lamp, and I looked at my closet, but no one was there. I told my parents what happened. For some reason, they said it was my imagination. My 15-year-old imagination, I guess. I told them that I wasn't 3 years old and I know what I saw. A week later, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, surprisingly seeing the same dark figure in my mirror, but he was closer to my bed, a lot closer. I ran screaming out of my room and told my parents again. I told them that there's no way that I would sleep in my room again. So my father said he was sleeping there starting the next night, in which I pleaded for him not to do it. Of course, he didn't listen and went anyway. The first few nights, there was nothing happening. My father didn't understand what scared me, but insisted that I never go in the room again. I go in there and grab anything that I needed. One night, my parents were placing more gifts under our Christmas tree, while joking about the so-called monster in my room, as my father says. This whole time while he slept in my room, I slept in his with my mother, but I was on the floor. We all watched the movie and went to bed like usual. But my mother and I watched the Grinch movie, and that's when I guess I dozed off. My mother and I were startled hearing my father scream like that. We both ran into my room. My father was grabbing his left arm and the left side of his chest area. At the same time, he was pointing at the mirror with a startled look. My mother screamed for me to call 911, in which I ran to another room to call. When I came back, my mother was crying uncontrollably and my father wasn't moving anymore. His eyes were wide open, in the direction of the mirror, just stuck on it. My father passed away from a massive heart attack. After that night, my uncles and grandparents helped us move out because we didn't want to stay there anymore. My grandfather found a journal on the nightstand next to my bed. I never put it there. My mother looked at it and said it was my father's handwriting. What we didn't know was that my father kept a log for every night that he slept in my room. He mentioned that he saw someone in the mirror, and every night he would get closer to the point that the dark figure was standing over the bed. He just didn't tell anyone because he didn't want to scare us. I really don't know what to think, honestly. Is this my fault that he's dead? I know our Christmas that year was not joyful as we wanted it to be. About 10 to 12 years ago, I was a drug addict living in Cleveland, Ohio. I usually spent my days smoking, drinking, and I was usually up to no good. I would go with whoever had the drugs, basically. One day, my friend and I were talking with this guy, and he said he had some dope on him, and he invited us to his house. It wasn't the first time I've seen him invite women over to his house to smoke and do other drugs. He seemed nice, but I didn't feel comfortable going with him, but I was. Then I saw another friend across the street, so I went over there to her. After that, I went home, and my friend went with him. The next day, his house was surrounded by police and news cameras. I didn't know why, but my friend ended up telling me that when they were in his house, this guy, Anthony, punched her in the back of her head and started to choke her. Then she woke up in a bed. She said next to the bed, she saw a woman's body with no head attached, but she decided not to scream because he was asleep right next to her. She ended up crawling and getting out of the house, literally running out of the house, barely clothed, and ended up calling the police. Eventually, they found 11 bodies of 11 different women in and around his house. Who would have known that man was a serial killer? His name was Anthony Sowell. I'm so glad that my other friend caught my attention right before I was going to his house. Who knows? I could have been one of those bodies.
What happened in this house behind me is simply a nightmare, and there are a lot of deeply disturbing questions for authorities here. There were 6 bodies found in this house last week. This morning, we know there are more.
We discovered 4 additional, what we believe to be 4 bodies.
Police believe that they were murdered by this man, Anthony Sowell, a convicted rapist who had been living in the house.
It appears that this man had a insatiable appetite that he had to fill.
5 of the bodies have been identified as women. Police say they were strangled.
I didn't feel safe. There's something telling me don't go in this house.
One woman says she narrowly avoided being a victim.
How he was in love with me, how he wanted me to go up to his house and drink with him.
Sal was a registered sex offender. This tragedy raises questions about how closely he had been monitored by police.
Probation and parole is not really set up to be a law enforcement outfit. They're not set up to do the type of surveillance and supervision that might catch somebody like this guy.
The search of this house will continue. Chris, there could be still more bodies here.
Pierre, thank you for reporting.
When I was 10 years old, I stayed at home by myself for the first time while my parents went out for a date. I was really into horror movies, so my imagination ran wild, so I had every light on in the house. I was scared, honestly, but not so much due to the lights. My parents told me they would be back by 10, so I wasn't really worried. I had food, blockbuster movies to watch, and my favorite game, Manhunt, on my PS2. By the way, this was 2004. It started to get dark outside when all of a sudden a storm hit, and the lights went out. As soon as it happened, I ran into our living room near the front of the house with my flashlight. I was definitely afraid now. I decided to get under the covers on the couch. I tried to fall asleep, but I was so afraid I couldn't. I don't know why, but I peeked out from under the covers, and I swear, I saw the silhouette of a man in the corner of the room. I jumped back under my covers, breathing heavily. Then all I heard was slow, methodical footsteps. They were coming toward me. Then I heard whispering along with the footsteps. My heart was pumping out of my chest at this point. Then the sound stopped. I just laid there frozen. No sound. Go! I got up and ran out of the house because it felt like someone touched my arm. And I know I heard someone yell the word go. I pretty much ran out of the house with the blanket over my head. I ran to my neighbor's house. I told them what happened and they called the cops from their cell phones. My parents arrived a little later than they expected due to bad traffic. They seemed angry about what happened. The police say that there was no evidence of a break-in. I still to this day remember that feeling of fear, but I really don't know if it were my imagination or not. I have a story from when I was a little girl. My name is Imani, and my family moved to Kentucky in 2009 because of my parents and they had new jobs. Our trip was 12 hours long, and the whole time my mother kept bringing up the fact that my father got this big house for a great deal, but she doesn't know how. He just kept saying that he was a smooth talker. Once we got there, my sister and I were so amazed with how big the house was. As we began to unpack, we heard someone ring the doorbell. My sister and I ran downstairs as my mother opened the door. We saw that it was a few of our neighbors with their kids, who were also girls. We began to speak with the kids as our mothers spoke with the other moms. Then one of the girls said that they used to play at the house with the little girl that used to live there. Then she asked, "Did you hear about what happened here?" Everyone immediately stopped speaking, including the mothers. And they all looked at us, and they looked at the other girls. My mom looked confused, and one of the mothers said, we have to go. I have to go, pet the dog. And she grabbed her daughter, and they all left. Immediately that night, we would hear random sounds throughout the house, but we didn't think anything of it. But as time went on, we would all complain about seeing stuff out the corner of our eyes, but when we would turn to see what it was, whatever we thought we saw was gone. There were a few times that all of us would complain about hearing little kids laughing. So one day my mother finally told my father about what the girl next door said, and he looked as if he knew something. He was acting suspicious and finally told my mother why we got the house so cheap. We didn't hear him, but he whispered it to her. I asked my mother what happened, but she would never tell me the details. All she would say is, "Something bad happened, and it involved a young girl. She wasn't a good girl." And that's all she would tell me. So one day my father installed motion sensor lights within the house. Every room had the lights installed, so we didn't have to use light switches anymore. One night, everyone in my house was asleep but me, and I heard some laughing. I was sitting in the living room, so I thought it might be my little sister. But something told me it wasn't her because it was 2 a.m. and she wouldn't be playing that late. Then I heard it again. So I like to explain where I was sitting. You could see all the way down the other end of the house, down this hallway, but I was in our living room. So I'm sitting downstairs in the darkness of our living room, and out of the corner of my eye, one of the motion sensor lights came on in the hallway at the other end of the hallway, and then it went off. Then another one in the hallway came on that was actually closer, and that's when I looked down the hallway. Then that light went off, and the next light came on. It was getting closer. This was happening as if someone was walking down the hallway, and then that light went off. At that point, I muted my TV, stared down the dark hallway, and out of nowhere, the light in the living room came on and the blanket on the couch fell on the floor. I jumped back, I grabbed my phone and immediately took a photo of where the blanket and the couch were. I looked at my phone and this is what I saw. It looked like a young girl. I started to scream and I ran out of there so fast to my parents' room and I told them. They believed me. They looked at the picture. That's all the proof they needed. This spooked my parents so much that we moved out the next week and never went back there. Not even for the stuff that we left. And that was the creepiest experience in my life. I live in Oregon in an area that has a lot of open areas like farms, lots, and just open fields. We also live about 6 miles from the nearest city. My parents own a lot of land, including our backyard, which is a well-kept area, and then it turns into a forest. Well, about 10 years ago in 2011 for about a week or so, I remember hearing weird stuff out in that forest. And one day my father said that he was grilling and he went inside. He went inside for maybe 3 minutes, but when he came back outside, the grill was open and all of the meat was gone. He thought maybe it were raccoons. So again, he grilled another day and the same thing happens. After the second time, my father went to check the tapes, and what he saw was terrifying. It looked like something from a movie, like the movie Signs, the Alien movie. It was very skinny, with no hair on his body, with eyes that would not be considered human eyes. My dad was a jokester, so I was convinced that he was playing a joke on me. He told my uncle what was going on, who's a police officer. He called him over to the house, showed him the video, and asked what he could do. My uncle didn't take my father serious, just like me, because my father was always playing jokes on people. To shut my father up, he told him that he would look into it. They decided not to tell my mom because she would freak out. I've never seen my father be this serious before. I thought it was just great acting until I woke up out of nowhere that same night. I heard the same sounds I had been hearing before. My room was in the back of the house on our second floor, and I always kept my window open. So I looked outside in the darkness of the forest and just stared for about a minute. At that point, it was time for me to investigate. I had to see what it was or who that was messing with me. I watched a lot of military and spy movies, so I decided to sneak up on whatever this was with my camera. I went outside, silently walking into the forest with my night vision on, and this is what I caught on camera.
I'm hearing the things in my woods again. I don't know if you can hear the noise. I'm recording with night vision right now. I've been hearing the sounds in the back of my woods. Quite a bit. The heck is that? Where'd we go?
I know that's what I've been hearing, but I'm not sure what it was or what it was doing, honestly. I just know that I surprised it. I'm not one to say that this was something weird, but maybe it was an animal. But it didn't look like any animal that I've ever seen in this area, or any human. What do you think it was? One rainy day when I was driving home, I came across this man who was walking. As I'm approaching him, I debate with myself if I should give this man a ride or not. It can be dangerous because you never know what can happen. But in the end, I decided to stop and ask him if he needed a ride. When I stopped, I looked at him and my first thought is, poor man, soaking wet, dirty clothes, and with a face of someone that just lost everything. So I asked him, "Can I give you a ride, sir?" Which he replies, "A ride downtown will be appreciated." I told him of course, and he got inside. When he entered the car, he didn't say a word. I tried making small talk, but he wasn't answering. He just sat there looking into the void. After a few minutes, I asked him if he wanted to eat something. It was late in the night, but I could pass my house and make something for this man. I had established at this point that this man wasn't dangerous at all. He looked skinny and frail. The man answered, "Yes, please. I haven't eaten in a few days." It didn't surprise me, and I told him I would prepare something to eat, then I would arrange a place for him to sleep. When we arrived, I took the man to the kitchen. I told him to sit down and I would prepare something for us to eat. He sat down and I went into the fridge and I saw what I could do for the both of us. I was actually hungry too. But when I looked back to check the guy again, he was already gone. I couldn't find him anywhere. I had checked everywhere except in my basement. Usually my basement door is always locked, but for some reason this time it wasn't. So I made my way down the stairs and I see him standing in the middle of my floor, looking at me at the bottom of the stairs. I approached him slowly. Couldn't see his eyes, but he held an aggressive posture facing me. He then says, "It was you." "I don't understand," I said. At that moment, he shows me a necklace and says, "This was my wife's, and I found it here. It took me a long time, but I finally caught you." He draws out a knife from his pocket and he tries to slash my neck. He missed by inches but made me fall back. Once on the ground, I took my concealed handgun and I shot him twice in the chest. He fell to the ground. I got up and I shot him one more time just to make sure. And then I tell myself, I need to be more careful. You see, the thing is, I've done some messed up things in my past, and this guy pretty much caught me. I guess I robbed his wife or something, but I couldn't let that situation unfold. I'm not going back to jail. This story is about my friend and her 6-year-old son. One day, she brought a new phone. When she came home from work, she started cooking dinner and left her phone down on the kitchen table. Her son came into the kitchen and saw the phone. He asked his mother if he could play with it, and she actually told him yeah, as long as he did not call anyone or delete any text messages. So of course, the boy agreed and went off to his bedroom, well actually his mother's bedroom, to play with the phone. Around 10 p.m. that night, she went upstairs to tuck him in, and she found him fast asleep on the bed. The new phone was lying on the ground beside the bed. She picked it up and began browsing through the settings to make sure he had not deleted anything. She noticed some minor changes. He had changed the theme, the background, and had given her a new ringtone. She noticed that he had taken some pictures with the phone. She opened the images folder and browsed through the phone. How cute, she thought. He had been taking selfies. Then she came across the last photo in the folder. When she first saw it, she couldn't quite believe it. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? It was a photograph of her son lying asleep on her bed. But the disturbing thing was that there was someone lurking in the far left corner of the picture. It seemed to show the left side of a creepy old woman's face. Until this day, her son could never answer the question about who that woman was and how she got in there. My name is Chris, and this story happened about 2 years ago in September. I was 15 years old and had at the time started a new school. I was there for about 2 weeks and I had yet to make any friends. There was another new student that started. His name was Caleb. He was a bit socially awkward, but we started talking, hanging out together, and soon became friends. We both had something in common in being the new kids at school. I hung out with Caleb at school a few times during the weekends. The more time I spent with this dude, Caleb, the more uncomfortable I became around him. He would always speak about strange or depressing topics. He would ask me things like how I will kill somebody and get away with it. Every weird question he asked me, he would then tell me in great length and detail what he would do in that situation. It was like he thought about this stuff all the time. One weekend I went to Caleb's house for a sleepover. When I arrived at Caleb's house, he was home alone. Caleb never spoke about his mom, and he told me that his dad was always working late and he wouldn't see him until the morning time. So we ordered pizza, played video games, and watched movies until late at night. I remember looking at the time and I saw it was 2:40 a.m. I said I was tired and I told Caleb I wanted to go to sleep. So I went downstairs because I would be sleeping on a fold-out couch and Caleb would be sleeping in his room. It took some time for me to fall asleep because Caleb kept me awake by walking around upstairs and switching the lights on and off. I remember having an awful dream that I was drowning and I felt like I was about to die. I woke up in a panic and Caleb had his hands around my throat. He was shaking me. I sat up coughing and struggling to breathe. After I sat up, Caleb asked if I was all right and told me that he came downstairs to get a glass of water and saw it looked like I was having a nightmare, so he shook me to wake me up. I told Caleb I was fine and I thanked him for waking me up. Caleb went back upstairs. I was a bit shook up from what just happened, so I didn't fall asleep right away. I eventually calmed down and managed to get back to sleep after about an hour. When I woke up in the morning, I saw Caleb sitting on the couch on the other side of the room, staring at me. He said I should leave because his dad would be home soon. It was an odd way to end our sleepover, I remember thinking to myself. I thought about if Caleb's dad even knew I was even staying over. Either way, I didn't feel welcomed anymore, so I did what Caleb said and I left to go home. About 2 days later, someone on Facebook messaged me saying that they saw that I was friends with Caleb, and they told me that Caleb used to go to their school. He didn't warn me to stay away from him. He said Caleb was accused of killing another student at a sleepover, and the case went to court. Caleb was found not guilty due to a lack of motive and evidence, but the school Caleb was at didn't want him there anymore. I wasn't sure if I believed what that random person had told me about Caleb, but I did think about the recent sleepover I had. I thought about if Caleb really was trying to wake me up from a nightmare, or was he trying to kill me in my sleep? Caleb did make me feel uncomfortable at times, but after being told he was accused of killing another student, it kinda made me afraid of him. I decided not to spend so much time with Caleb after that, and only hung out with him in school. About 2 months later, he moved away, and I eventually lost contact with him, until a few years later. I saw something on Facebook about a murder in another town. I saw Caleb's picture and I read about what happened. Caleb managed to get a girlfriend, and one day he went to her house to spend time with her while she was babysitting her brother. While Caleb was there, his girlfriend fell asleep as he played video games with her younger brother. She woke up to a woman screaming. That woman was her mother. Caleb's girlfriend went downstairs, saw her mother on her knees screaming. She then looked over at the game area where her brother and Caleb were. At least she thought Caleb was there. What she saw was horrifying. Her brother was laying on his back. Blood was everywhere. But that wasn't the worst of it. His head was missing and Caleb wasn't anywhere to be found. They immediately called the cops, and Caleb was actually caught roaming the streets with blood all over him, including his mouth. Caleb confessed to killing the little boy, but he also confessed to eating parts of him. One thing that they never found was his head. Caleb doesn't remember. Well, at least that's what he told the police. This is the craziest experience that I ever had in my life. I was 11, about to be 12 at the time, and I went to a Catholic school that was pretty small. In the middle of the school year, we got a new kid. I can't remember his name, but he seemed a little off. He didn't really talk to anyone, but he always turned in his work first, and he was a little standoffish from everyone. So I had gym with him, and he was very aggressive when it came to sports. Very good at basketball. I remember our basketball coach telling another teacher that he had some skills and he was going to put him on the team once he became a 7th grader. So one day in class, I remember something about him stood out to me. The reason I say that is because he coughed, and it sounded like a grown man coughing, but he was 12 years old at the time. I can remember him being picked up from school by his uncle and his granddad. I knew that because he randomly asked me to come over to his house with them. I said no, but all three of them insisted that I come over because they had video games and a lot of ice cream for everyone. I continued to say no and they moved on. Eventually that boy left our school, but something weird happened. So he tried enrolling in another school, but that school called the police on him because all of his documents were forged. Come to find out, this was a 29-year-old man who went from school to school posing as a 12-year-old boy. His name was Casey Price, a convicted sex offender. The man that were with him when he tried to get me to come over to his house weren't even related to him. They were 44-year-old Robert James Snow and 61-year-old Lonnie Eugene Stifler. I'm so happy that I didn't go with these guys, because only the devil knows what they had planned for me. I work on boats that transport different goods around, different parts of the world. So we like to travel across the ocean. So I've been everywhere. I'm not going to say exactly where we were, but it had been a few days since we took off from shore. The next boat behind us took off 4 hours after we did. This was the time of the year where we run into a lot of ice islands or glaciers. So we were used to this. This time, it was a little different. I remember us doing our usual and all of a sudden we hit something. We always graze ice, but we continue to move. This time we hit it and it stopped almost immediately. It was in the middle of the night, so we looked overboard and we couldn't see anything. So we shined our big spotlight on what was in the way, and it was a big ice chunk. We also noticed a huge hole in the side of the ship and water was rushing in. Then noticed that the ship was sinking. We knew another ship was coming this way, so we felt okay with what was happening because we knew that ship can help us. We got in contact with that ship and they said they were actually 5 hours away and not 4. The ship was sinking at a rapid pace, so we all exited the ship and got onto a huge ice island. There were about 20 of us on this big chunk of ice just watching the ship sink. An hour went by and one of the other workers asked, "What's that?" Everyone spotted what he was talking about. We all saw 2 glowing eyes on a head that was slightly sticking out of the water. It was just floating there. We could tell that it was eyeballs because of the moonlight. It had to be at least 300 feet away from us. So as we're standing there were at least 5 small ice islands between us and whatever that was in the water. But it wasn't moving. We all watched it as it was watching us watch the boat. So some of us quit paying attention to it, and another hour goes by. Then someone yells out that it was moving. Everyone looks at it again, and those eyes were moving closer to us in the water, with that head halfway out of the water. At this time, it gets to an ice island, and it stops. It doesn't get on the island. It's still far away from us, but it's closing in. Then we see it get out of the water and it climbs on the island. Then one of the guys says, "Oh my God, that's a polar bear." It stood there and it stared at us, and it was sniffing in the air. It was trying to figure us out. Then it walks forward and then it jumps back into the water and begins to swim toward us again. It was closing in, but then it stopped again and was just watching us. So it watched us for about 20 minutes. Then it began to swim again. And at this time, the sun was coming up and we could clearly see that its head was sticking out of the water. And when it came upon another island, it climbed up on it and began to watch us even more. At this time, it was about 100 feet away from us. It had to be about 2 more islands before it got to us. Everyone was afraid, and at this time, it was moving slowly. And that helped ease our anxiety, honestly. We knew that the other boat would be there in about 2 hours at this point. Then the bear jumps back into the water and it swims toward us. But at this time, it was going at a faster pace. It climbs on the island next to ours, and everyone on our island runs to the opposite side of our island. But there was nowhere else to go after that. We couldn't jump in the water because we'd freeze to death. Then it stares for a few seconds, and then it jumps back into the water. And it swims, and then it climbs onto our ice island. But it was going slowly. As soon as it gets to our piece of ice, it just stands there and it stares at us. Everyone was freaking out. Then it starts walking toward us. And out of nowhere, it became very aggressive and running toward us and making noises, grunting. We were all moving and trying to stay away from it. Then I heard something as I was running that I would never forget. There was this guy named William. He began to scream in a way that I can still hear it in my head today. I looked back and the polar bear had him. It was clawing at him, on top of him. Then he stops making noises and quits moving. But the polar bear continued to do what it was doing. We knew he was dead. Then it took his body in the water, then onto the next ice island, and it feasted. It did it slowly, very slow. The worst part of it is that the polar bear never took his eyes off of us as it ate. So it was pretty much telling us that we were next and there was nothing that we could do about it. Another hour went by and it stopped. There was red everywhere. The polar bear was not white anymore. It began to walk toward the edge of the ice island it was on, and then we heard a loud horn. We looked in the distance and it was another ship. It was the ship that we were talking about. The polar bear stopped. Then it turned and looked at the ship, then began to walk toward the edge again. Then the ship blew the horn again, over and over. They noticed what was happening. The bear stopped and it turned. Then it looked at us. Then it looked at the ship again. And it just stood there, looking back and forth. Then it turned away from us, jumped in the water, and simply just swam away. We all just sat there staring at William on the other ice island, as it didn't even look like him. He was lifeless. Everyone was crying or they were in shock. Eventually the other ship came and got us. We retrieved what was left of William and we got out of there. That day mentally scarred everyone who was there, and it's something that we can't forget. When I was a young girl, my family and I moved to Kentucky because my father was in the Army. This was our second time moving in 4 years. I remember our first day getting to our new house, and the movers got there the same time we did. I also remember my two sisters and I running around the house, and then we went into our rooms. I explored the room and I went into the closet where there was something on the top shelf. So I grabbed it and it was a Ouija board. My sisters and I all looked at each other and we decided to play it later that night after the movers left. Eventually the movers left and we were all relaxing in our rooms. So my two sisters mentioned the Ouija board because I forgot all about it. We had a few boxes in our room because we were all still unpacking. So we formed a circle around us with the boxes, turned out the lights, and my older sister, who was 12 at the time, she lit a few candles. We set the board up and began to ask questions. We immediately got a response, and I could tell that my sisters weren't messing around. Being that we could tell that this was serious, we all asked a question. But it was the same question. My oldest sister asked, "Why are you here?" The planchette slid over to H-E-R and it spelled her. Then my other sister asked the same question. "Why are you here?" The planchette slid to H-E-R. That also spelled her. And then I asked, "Why are you here?" But the planchette didn't move. I looked at my sisters and I complained that they moved it when they asked the question. They claimed that they didn't. Then we sat there in silence waiting for it to move. Then all of a sudden we hear, "You." But it was like someone whispered in my right ear very loudly. We all stood up and backed up against the wall. Then all of a sudden the bedroom door flew open and we all screamed. Standing in the doorway was my mother. She looked down at the board and began to yell at us. She picked the board up and threw it in the trash that was outside. So we went to bed, but I freaked out about that voice. The next day, as we continued to unpack, I forgot all about what happened, but my back began to hurt a lot. My mother asked me to help her bring this new painting into the house. It had some weird lady on it. We had to put it above the fireplace. Once we put it up, I noticed that it looked like the lady in the painting's eyes followed me. But anyways, my back kept hurting, and it was getting worse day by day. It literally felt like someone was on my shoulders. So I told my mother how I felt. So she took me to the doctor's office, and I stepped on the weight scale, and surprisingly it said 200 pounds. At that time, I was 10 years old, and I was definitely small, so there's no way I was 200 pounds. I was weighed on multiple scales, and they all said the same thing, but no one could understand why. I can remember getting home that afternoon, and I took a nap, but I kept having these bad nightmares. But I was really having nightmares every night ever since we used that Ouija board. My older sister said it was because of the Ouija board, and I'm having nightmares because I'm the one that found the Ouija board. So my grandparents came to visit us. My grandmother is very weird, and she's a psychic. And when she walked in, she went from smiling immediately to frowning. She hugged my parents and sisters, then she approached me and stopped in her tracks. At that point, she whispered something into my mother's ears, and she looked worried. Then my grandmother hugged me with one arm and told me that I should go sit down somewhere, but as if she was worried about me. My mother told her that she caught us playing with a Ouija board, and my grandmother asked her did we close the session. And my mother was confused. My grandmother then explained it to her that you have to close the session, and then asked my mother has anything weird been happening ever since then. She told her about the doctor's office and how my weight just skyrocketed, but there's no way that I could weigh that much. Then my grandmother proceeds to explain to my parents and I that being that the session wasn't closed, a spirit was attached to me, literally. When she walked in the house, she saw the spirit. It was literally on my shoulders and my back. And that's why the weight scales were so much. I was freaked out and I started to panic. My grandmother calmed me down and conducted some kind of seance, and all the pressure on my back and shoulders was gone. But my grandmother said since the Ouija board was thrown out, that means the session can't be closed, which means that the spirit will always be out there. Immediately following what she did, she took a picture outside of my bedroom, but she asked me multiple times, was I sure that I want to see it? I said yes. And this is the picture that she took. I was way more freaked out after she showed me this, but we haven't had any problems ever since. I remember this was a few days into summer break. I was going away to Florida to be with my grandpa the week following, so my friends and I decided to hang out until it was time for me to leave. It was about 5 of us, 3 girls, 2 boys. For this story, I'll call them Miguel, Denise, Maria, and Eric. Miguel and Denise were twins, and the oldest of us, being 15. Maria and Eric were both 14, while I was the youngest at the time, being 12. They babied me a lot since I was the only one still in middle school, while the others were freshmen in high school. I remember it was a Thursday afternoon around 3 or 4. We were sitting on Eric's couch, and we've been playing FIFA since school let out around 2:05, and Eric suggested that we go to the park. We all agreed bringing our baseball mitts, bats, and ball. The park was only about 2 blocks away from Eric's backyard. It had a nice sized playground surrounded by climbable trees. There was a softball field just a few yards from the playground, their small graveyard, and a dense patch of woods. Scary thing is that there are 3 small private cemeteries along the side of the park, separated by a metal gate. We tend to ignore it a lot since you can't really see it unless you try to. We start our little game. We played about 2 innings, going into another one with Maria, being the most daring, says with an evil smirk on her face. Let's hop the fence to the graveyard. Miguel and Denise looked at her like she was out of her mind. Miguel asked, are you crazy? What if an undertaker is walking around and we get caught? Maria said, we're not going to get caught, just play it cool. We all were on the same boat for a few minutes. The sky was starting to get dark at this time. We dropped our bats and gloves and walked over some big sticks to the tall gate. Eric was the first one over, being the tallest. Then it was Maria, then Miguel, then Denise. As mentioned before, I was the youngest, and I was the smallest. I was also terrified of heights. When all the others hopped over, I squeezed in through an opening of the bottom of the fence. We started to wander around, and not 5 minutes later, fireflies started to blink around us, and the air got sticky and muggy. The street lights on the block started to come on, though no lights shined in the graveyard, but we still played around catching the bugs and putting them on each other. I, being the daring, idiotic kid I was, I would do front flips off the gravestones. I know it was wrong, but we were considered troublemakers in our neighborhood. We laughed and joked around until Maria suddenly stopped. "Look," she says. Out in the far distance behind a big tree was something protruding from a small pile of leaves. It looked too weird to be a stick or an old log. I glanced at my friends, seeing the curiosity on their faces. Maria starts toward the mysterious object with determination in her steps. We stayed behind, letting the girl explore. As she got closer, I could feel my nerves suddenly getting bad. Like something was wrong about the whole situation. Everyone watched as she slows a bit, then stops abruptly right in front of the tree. She stays still for a few seconds, then proceeded with caution. I look over at my friends, who are also watching attentively. I started telling them that we should go, then all of a sudden, I was suddenly interrupted by a loud, blood-curdling scream coming from Maria. Eric immediately starts running full speed toward her, and we follow right behind him. My adrenaline was so high, I could hear nothing but the faintness of our crunching footsteps and my loud heartbeat. My calves started burning as we approached the still screaming girl. Eric reaches her, looking at what she was looking at, and backed up. His eyes were wide in utter fear while we stared at the scene. The others and I stopped before getting too close, groaning and covering our noses. Once an unbelievable smell reaches our sense. Miguel asks what it was. Eric slowly looks at us, body trembling. No, it's not real, Maria said. Maria had turned her body away from whatever she was staring at, holding her stomach and retching loudly. I pushed past the other kids, keeping my eyes to the ground, and I made my way to the frightened pair. What I saw still haunts me to this day. The smell was stronger, almost making me throw up. But once my eyes processed what I was seeing, it's like I forgot how to function completely. It was the body of a white male, nude with his body mangled. He was laying in an awkward position. I tried my best to describe it, but his leg was bent at an unnatural angle and his arms were broken through the skin, folded behind his head. His face was covered in deep cuts infested with maggots, and his whole body was drenched. I stood frozen, watching as maggots crawled on him and flies buzzing around his corpse. Honestly, I don't remember if I was breathing or not. Before I knew it, I felt a strong tug on my arm. Eric told me that we had to go. I saw that the others had already taken off, Miguel picking up Maria and running with her. Before I could even think to move, Eric does the same to me, throwing me over his shoulder and running as fast as he could. We ran along the gate, finding the opening that I had crawled through earlier. Everyone was already on the other side. The next hour after that was a blur, but I do remember getting home, mute and shaken. No one knows but us. I haven't spoken to any of them in years, and I'm sure this story has been suppressed in their minds like mine. That night gave me nightmares for years, and now at 22, I still remember that smell. Nightmare Files.